Welcome to Massive Passive Cash Flow, the podcast that guides professionals to financial prosperity. Join our community and let's start building your wealth. Here's your host, Gary Wilson.
Welcome back to the Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast. I'm Gary Wilson, your host. I'm so glad you're back listening to the show. We have a great guest today, Spencer Hilligoss, all the way from the Bay Area, California. I know you're thinking Bay, you got East Bay, North Bay, South Bay, West Bay. We'll let Spencer fill in the blanks here. So first off, Spencer, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for joining us. I know what you're doing, and I know that you spending time with us is a big investment of time. So thank you for doing this,
Absolutely. Honored to be here, Gary. The honor's mine. So thank you for having me here. Fan of the show. I did listen to it before we got on here today. So yeah, excited for the conversation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Hey, if you wouldn't mind, we got a lot to unpack here. I was looking at the one sheet. We've had a great conversation, so I'm really excited about this one. But would you mind taking people back to the beginning, like what led you to where you are now? What was one of the pivotal moments, or something in the past that was like, gee, this is a life lesson I'm gonna carry with me, and now you realize you're carrying it with you. So kind of start there, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, happy to. And I'll try to keep this digestible for folks because, like any other story or journey we all go through in life, I mean, there's twists and turns you don't predict. And there's been plenty for us. But let me start with where I am now. I run Madison Investing. It's just an investing club. We invest passively in bigger properties, cash flowing stuff. And now, just a quick anecdote. We had a kind of a milestone in the last year. I have 2 young kids. My co-founder and COO is my wife, Jennifer Morimoto. That's its own podcast about co-founding a company with your spouse. We went and lived abroad with our 2 young boys, and we did that for about 6 weeks last summer in Portugal.
Wow.
If I an experience like that, if I were to kind of go back in time, Gary, and think about when I was like leading teams of people working 80 hours a week inside financial tech companies for 13 years, I would have been like, man, what are you smoking? That's never going to be possible. You can't go do that. You can't pull back from the work. You can't go live abroad like that. So that is, I am here to say, very much possible. But it comes as a result of a really heads down journey and learning over the course of years. So to answer your question, I grew up in the Bay Area, California. Did spend about 10 years in Colorado as well along the way. But I grew up in a broker household. My dad was a broker, residential agent for 30 years. And eventually that's kind of what scared me into working in tech companies. I was working open houses, when I was a young, early teenager. Wasn't exactly loving that. I would rather have been hanging out with my friends at that point, I think. But frankly, I look back at that journey to now, full circle, somehow touching this wonderful world of real estate in a very different way. And I'm just grateful for that experience because 13-year career in tech companies, progressively smaller, earlier stage places that you're really excited about the mission. You're growing big teams. I was thrust into leading teams of over 200 people at the age of around, I think it was 26. At one point, way in over my skis, just like, that's how you learn. That's how you learn along the way. But eventually there was a moment when I realized about, 10 and 11 years into that career when I hadn't seen my younger son for, I think 2 weeks. He was very young at that point. I was going in when the sun was down. I was coming home when the sun was down, and it was really like a spark lighting moment for me, Gary, where I was like, something's got to give. I mean, we were making wonderful income, W-2 wise, both Jennifer and I, 2 separate careers, living in the Bay Area, textbook definition of what I think a lot of people would say, oh, that looks quote unquote successful. Maxing your 401k, right? And in Silicon Valley, basically where I'm working here is people want to sign up for this unwritten lottery, right? Of like, hey, maybe I'll get some big exit, the next Google, Meta IPO event, the big liquidity event that'll get me out of that grind. And it's just not, that never materialized for me. That never materializes for most people.
Right.
So we had to do something else. And so along the way, we said, okay, something's got to give. And after I hadn't seen my son for a couple of weeks, and this is back around 2017, I was like, okay, we're going to start doing things differently. And we started making passive investments, and there's a much more robust story from there. But it's been a real journey. And I think that the lesson I learned, just one more thing I'll add on this, kind of going back to my dad's experience watching him build a brokerage business, was that really successful during, 80s and 90s, like top 5 agent in the country. And I was like,
Mhm.
wow, dad's doing great. Uh, I lost a younger brother along the way to cancer, and
Mm.
that combined with a divorce, combined with a bunch of other stuff and losing multiple family members, not to go too grim for people here, but I'll just say all that happened in a period of time that was like what we call kind of the dark decade in our family. And
Mhm.
like, uh, dad's income went from flying high, active income,
Yeah.
only income for the family, to reduced way down. Family had to scale down.
Mm.
Uh, so as a father now with my own family, those lessons stick,
Yeah.
and yeah, those lessons stick, and they stick around topics such as like, how do I ensure there's a moat of some sort, financial moat built around my family. And,
Yeah.
God forbid something happened to me, happened to Jennifer or otherwise. And so I digress. I think a lot of good learnings along the way as to why I'm so passionate about doing what we do and investing the way we do and helping others do it.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is so with the story of your dad, it sounds like he was obviously successful, but one of the things I've seen with a lot of agents is even though technically we're independent contractors, we're by default, we're technically entrepreneurs. But a lot of agents really don't think and behave like entrepreneurs. They don't build, entrepreneurs build. That's what we do. We build businesses, but they're transaction oriented. So it's like a job, but they don't have the security of a job like 401k and medical insurance and all that. So let's just launch there. When it comes to like the entrepreneurial mindset, what's the best approach, would you say, when it comes to coming up with a passive investment plan and allowing yourself to let go and let the strategy work for you, which is fundamental in being an entrepreneur. You got to be able to, I call it surrender. If your
Yes.
plan's good, it's going to work. It's like a good football team. You don't have to have the best quarterback as long as you got a good plan. So
Oh,
we
I
kind
love
of
that.
take from there. Mhm.
Yeah. And man, I love what you said there is like, once you got the plan, effectively surrender to it, and
Yeah.
gosh, that's how it feels in practice. um,
Hmm.
so I'll start here and say that the goal setting process was sounds very humble, but it was the most profound thing that no one wants to do at the beginning. We all want to jump in and take action. The transactional, close a deal mindset, I think is resonates with me as well, Gary, as I'm sure it does with a lot of folks. When I was working full time with Jennifer and we were in that tough place, like making great money with negative time availability, just stressed to
Hmm.
the gills, we hired a sitter, took a whole weekend. This is when we're working full time still. We hadn't gone out and bought a bunch of properties or invested, 7 figures of our own capital yet. Uh,
Hmm.
and we sat down and said, okay, let's run the numbers. And that's all we did. We got a bunch of sticky notes. We took the whole weekend, literally had conversations that were intense. And I don't mean that has to be a yelling argument. What I mean is you're questioning these big elephants in the room, the taboo stuff that you might not necessarily want to get into together. And this is
Right.
not, if it's a couple out there having these conversations, that's more in line with what we did. If a person is
Hmm.
single, that's going to be a solo exercise. But for us, in one weekend, there was a cycle of tears, reconciliation,
Hmm.
laughter, profound connection. And I'll keep it there. I won't get too philosophical and touchy feely for folks. But I kid you not. I mean, that is the type of stuff that actually does change someone's rudder in terms of where they're
Hmm.
sailing in the journey. And what we said was, what is the number on passive income, cash flow per
Hmm.
month we need coming in the door to be
Hmm.
cover all of our needs, to cover our housing, to cover, just the basics. And we said, cool, we got the number. We then said, how long is it going to take us to get there? So you got the number.
Hmm.
That's the first thing we got. Second thing we got was the time horizon. The time horizon, this is where I have messed this up. Countless people have messed this up. I'll still do it sometimes now, but we did this part right. We said 15 years from our starting point. We're going to give ourselves a long runway. Let's go 15 years out to hit that number. That way, folks have said, why so long? It's because it takes away the excuse. It
Yeah.
takes away right? It's like you said, surrendering to the plan. At 15 years, all we had to do was build the darn thing and surrender to it. And if we did that, we knew it was going to work.
Yeah.
About a weekend later, uh, I kid you not, we did the whole thing again. We came back and we said, that's way too long. So we're going to chop it in half,
Hmm.
which we did. We cut it down to about 7 years. We ended up hitting that number in 5.
Yeah.
So I just wanted
Nice.
to bring that up first because everyone is tempted to do that, and I think that if I've been in that transactional headspace before myself professionally, where you're like next deal, next deal. The problem with that is ultimately you're not zooming out, you're not elevating above to look at the whole picture. All you're looking at is right in front of you, short-term thinking. So we ran that exercise, and it was profound, and we beat our time horizon just by working the play.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you sharing that because that's very specific, and you've involved your spouse, and there's so many good parts to that. But as far as getting started, like the actual, the funding and all that. So you mentioned
Yeah.
being in Silicon Valley, and everybody's packing away their 401k to the max. So what are the benefits of using, and did you or can you use a 401k, an IRA, an EQRP,
Mm.
um, when it comes to passive real estate investments? And I've done a little bit of that. I haven't done all of these, but what have you seen done, or what's possible?
Yeah. I mean, this is a fun topic I like to nerd out on as well.
Mhm.
I myself have a solo 401k. I've invested in, at this point, I think a couple dozen deals with it of different types. But briefly, I want to answer that first question you asked there, Gary, which is being specific. What actions we took, I think of as like basically three phases. From the time we were working full time, maxing out those 401ks, the first scary moment for us, and I'm not recommending this for people. I'm just saying what we did. Uh,
Mhm.
I turned off my 401k contributions, and that was
Mhm.
scary, and I was like, hey, I want cash flow that's applicable for our lives now. I still have some years before retirement age. Can't access it without the 10% penalty, right? So what did we do? We ended up going out and buying a local duplex. Phase one,
Mhm.
buy a local duplex. We were too scared to go buy something sight unseen. We still have it now. I think we overpaid like crazy for it because we didn't know what it meant to buy for cash flow. So we bought a California, West Coast duplex for $430,000. We still have it now. It's appreciated a lot. We get
Mhm.
a couple $100 a month in cash flow net. I think some folks would call
Yeah.
that like a loser, and I still, for a cash flow investment, that's not great, right?
Yeah.
But we learned. We then
Mhm.
went out and got more confident. Phase two, as you were, we got up to 5 single family rentals in the Midwest, 60K a pop at the time,
Mhm.
$250 a month in cash flow. I mean, that is
Mhm.
a heck of a lot better in economics,
Yeah.
but we ended up saying, there's no such thing as a passive rental. I still believe that now. You can do semi-passive, which is great, but just going in eyes wide open, there's no such thing as a fully passive rental. You got to manage the manager at best. Um,
Yeah.
so we bought and sold those eventually, and we said phase three, we're going to start putting money into private placements and just different fully passive deals, big self-storage properties, portfolios,
Mhm.
multifamily, and some other niche stuff that generates cash flow now without lifting a finger. And so we did that. The first one we did was in Alabama, and we were able to put in, I think it was just a small one. It was like 25K compared to some of the other ones. And we doubled our money within about 2.5 years. Now that doesn't happen in, there was a great market that happened in 2021, 2022, beginning of it, and a lot of the preceding years. So that helped that out. But funding that stuff along the
Mhm.
way came
Yeah.
from the cash from our income and our jobs, which we worked hard to save up, came
Mhm.
from, we did do, I don't recommend this for everybody, but we were able to use some HELOC funds at the very beginning. So we were able to use a home equity line of credit. We had
Mhm.
built up great equity on our home in California. People should, they should analyze that, make sure that makes sense for them now. And interest rates were very different than they are now.
Yeah.
But I have also converted 4 separate 401ks that I had left over from 4 separate tech companies, combined them
Mhm.
together, and put them
Mhm.
into a solo 401k, which is one of the many wonderful ways that you alluded to earlier. The folks can do retirement account
Yeah.
investing. So it's been a learning journey, man. I mean, I listened to over 400 podcasts for education. I read 24 books in 18 months. People don't need to nerd out that hard. They
Yeah.
don't. They really don't. After a while, that's just procrastination. So I think
Yeah.
you got to just go out and start trying some stuff until hopefully intelligently along the way.
Yeah. Did you know that you can participate in class every Monday? We call it Monday Night Live, 7 p.m. Eastern, with me and dozens of other investor agents from around the country, in fact, the world. Every Monday, totally free. no selling, no recruiting, just straight up education on anything and everything in real estate. And we have a lot of good guests coming on once or twice a month, bringing in expertise on subjects like how to buy a house with crypto. Okay. How about them apples? What about AI? How's AI affecting our business? How about the metaverse, blockchain processing? We're already using it in title work. So come on to Monday Night Live, be ready to take notes and ask questions because it's live and engaging, and you get to participate by asking questions and meeting others. So we'll see you there. Go to realestatewithgarywilson.com, click on the resource tab, drop down, and you'll see Monday Night Live. And in there, you can see one of the most recent classes. But more importantly, you can register for class as many as you want going up to like the end of the year, I believe. So in any case, do that. We'll see you on Monday Night Live. Look forward to meeting you in person. Take care. One of my favorite mentors was a guy named Bill Bartman. We call him Billionaire Bill Bartman because he was a billionaire. But he was a very humble, down-to-earth guy. I got to meet him in person multiple times. I remember the second time I met him, I'm thinking, he's probably not going to remember because the guy meets probably dozens of people every day. And it had been a few years. Came right up to me, said, "Hey, Gary, man, so good to see you." Gave him this big, giant bear hug. We had this famous CD, success in business, something really simple. And it was 10 rules. And the first rule was, the reason why businesses go out of business is because they spend more than they make. And it's true. And no matter how you slice it and dice it, whatever the underlying circumstances are, eventually you spend more than you make. And rules 2 through 10 were see rule number 1.
Yeah.
So he was a pretty neat guy. But we did a lot of talking over the years. And I also used home equity. I used my 401k. I even got a personal line of credit in addition to the home equity line of credit. I'd use some cash. And a lot of people will hate me because I use cash. But the cool thing about using cash is, I did it strategically. It allowed me to get much better terms on the loans. So when I looked at, my cap rate, and then I looked at my internal rate of return, essentially cash on cash, like a lot of investors, you eventually learn to focus on cash return.
Yes.
And cap rate is more of a market indicator. Hey, what should this market return to me? How does this property compare to the market in terms of cap rate? But you talk to any really seasoned investor like Robert Kiyosaki, and they'll say, you know what? It's all about cash on cash. Plus,
That's
it
right.
allows you to think. It empowers you to think creatively. How can I structure this deal to have the most favorable cash on cash return I can get? So, but hey,
Love it.
speaking of cash, at some point we're going to make a profit. So what can you tell people about taxation? Like, what are the top 5 things, if people should know about taxes when it comes to passive real estate investing?
Gosh, it's a topic that I have to say, I used to work, but first big company I worked at was into it. Yeah. They process a third of the countries or more of the tax returns annually from TurboTax, right? And so you would think I found that interesting just because I was working there, right? And I worked at a bunch of other competitors to them over the years, all of which handling some form of tax, but I never thought how it applied to my own circumstances. And this topic is now deeply interesting because, particularly as I sit here in California, painfully aware of the tax burden that one has to deal with, jealous of the treatment that you get in your neck of the woods, Gary, on that front. But I would say that over time, the ability to get tax efficient income is hugely powerful for the wealth picture. So for us, in an example, I would say here is like, okay, when working full time, I'd be getting great W-2 income, perhaps some bonus checks along the way, annual, quarterly, for different reasons, different roles. And those are heavily taxed, right? Ordinary income. Over time, I realized I could generate income in a bunch of different ways. If I own my own company, I could take owner's distributions, right? And so for people who, if you're active, there's different ways to structure that, far more tax efficient. So that on the active side, that's great. For the passive investor, what really blew my mind is that if I go put 100K or 50K, the investment amounts tend to be a bit larger as a starting point, usually around 50K for these things. If I put in, let's say 100K, I can actually share in things like the depreciation that actually are generated on an accelerated fashion or bonus depreciation from a much larger property. And I'm still going to be taxed, but I can defer that tax moment and I can lower that tax burden until years later and reinvest what I don't have to pay in the meantime. And so those types of things, and hopefully I didn't lose folks on that one, but I'll just say
Yeah.
it feels great to get a big check, of course, up
Oh
front.
yeah.
But what matters to me more now is making sure I'd rather delay that gratification if it means it's going to be like, what is the net ultimate bigger number, especially if it's
Right.
a big sale event? Like, how do you mitigate things like capital gains tax or use 1031 exchanges, which is one of the things I was
Yeah.
going to bring up as well. A lot of folks out there are more familiar with the 1031 exchange on a
Hmm.
property to property basis. I didn't realize as a passive investor, I've invested in deals where I invest alongside 100 other investors in a big apartment building in another state. They improve it. Value looks great. They sell it. When they sell it, I was able to opt in for a 1031 exchange on that as well. It's not every time. It's got to be structured right. But I've deferred
Hmm.
that taxable event just because it was the right deal and it went well. It's not a guarantee every time, of course, but that has worked out for me multiple times now. And it kind of blew my mind that I didn't realize any of this stuff was part of, the tax planning picture. So over time, man, I mean, I'm sure you could, run circles around me with some of the stories and experiences you've had on the tax efficiency side, Gary, but that is
Yeah.
a massive wealth builder ultimately, because that tax
Yeah.
burden eats away at our income over time.
It does. The funny thing is about taxes, I finally figured this out over the years. Thankfully, I had a really good tax account. I have a good tax accountant, and he said, think about the tax code as a set of rules that
Mm.
allow you to reduce your tax burden. He said, just like in baseball, a lot of the teams that win in baseball, they might not be the most athletic, but they're very good at understanding the rules and playing strategically. Like for example, the teams that win the pennants, they're not the ones that hit the most grand slam home runs. They're the ones that put more people on base. They
Yeah.
take the base hits. So
Yes.
taxation is part of your business model. It should be part of your business plan. And so, for example, you mentioned like we call it cost segregation. So we would look at a big property, and we've done this. Buy a 90-unit building, and the building itself would depreciate over 27 and a half years. But when we segregate out the refrigerators and the stoves, and if there's any, paint sprayers and lawn mowers and snow removers and all this equipment and supplies and everything, they all have shorter depreciation schedules. So, so it turns out it's actually big business. There are REITs that will buy a property simply for the cost segregation component of
Mm.
it. Take the big, essentially, you know, you can call it losses, but really they're gains in a short period of time, and then resell the building. So the
Yes.
bigger the building, the greater the opportunity there. And you mentioned 1031 exchange. We could spend another whole podcast on that, but um, there are tax rules, guys. Make sure you align yourself with what I would call a tax advisor, someone who's worked with people with real estate, and they're easy to find. You can join your local investor clubs. You can talk to someone like Spencer or me, and we can tell you who we use. Um,
That's right.
some guys are local, but some tax advisors will work on a national scale. But when
Totally.
it comes, oh, go ahead, Spencer. I'm sorry.
No, it's just going to mention briefly, Garrett. Sorry to interrupt. That one of the biggest, most simple learnings that I didn't
Mhm.
really get. I feel like I'm still learning this one now, despite having used three different CPAs, worked with three different CPAs over the past 7 years. And
Mhm.
now we're on one we really like. Uh, there's really two buckets of tax support, right? There's you work with a tax professional, they help you do your annual returns.
Mhm.
That's all historical looking. That's looking backwards. But then there's the folks like you're talking about, Gary, which we now also pay for and find very valuable, very big ROI, return on investment for this is we pay more now
Mhm.
for tax filing, but also for tax advisory and planning. And that the forward-looking
Yeah.
stuff, when someone is building a business or if they're investing so often that they want that type of visibility, they want that type of forecasting. So you can start saying, here's what I think I'm going to owe. Here's how I can reduce what I owe legally,
Mhm.
of course, with the support of
Yeah.
that person. That's what we're talking about here. And I think just knowing those two different halves of the tax pie, right? Like that is profound. And at bare
Yeah.
minimum, I really recommend people go out and do work with some form of CPA. I know a lot of folks who try to keep it cheap and they don't want to do that, but I always recommend just go find someone. It's worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know what? If you think about it, having a good tax plan which allows you to reduce a major expense, which is your tax burden, that then frees up some cash flow. You've got your monthly cash flow. What are some other ways that you've seen or developed that allow people to increase their monthly cash flow, revenue streams, and really essentially allow them to get more flexibility in their life and their business? I mean, I'll give an example. We started when we would buy buildings that had garages underneath. We stopped renting the garages with the leases. We started leasing out the garages separately.
Hmm.
And then we did the same thing with storage. We would build storage and empty space and lease that out. Those are just little simple examples, but anything come to mind when you think about increasing cash flow or revenue stream, multiple sources of income from a building, for example,
Yeah, I mean, and there's a couple angles I'll take on that one, Gary. I think like first and foremost, something as simple as a storage property that we invested in Texas, and you can actually go and just if you have a big, storage facilities are simple. Ultimately, it's one of the reasons I love them. Big piece of concrete, simple shell, non-air conditioned building, no climate control. Got some extra space over in the property that's paved. You can go and talk to U-Haul. You could park a small fleet, not even if you need to call it a fleet, small fleet of trucks over in one piece of that property, and suddenly you've got a little bit of extra income on that storage property, right? And it's just simple stuff like that, at the property level. As a passive investor, one of the things that we did, I look back at and I'm incredibly grateful for because we made this decision a few years ago, before interest rates got a little bit got wonky, to say the least.
Mm-hmm.
Is we diversified even beyond just straight up real estate investing, owning the building outright or investing in a piece of it along with other folks. And we thought, well, how do we invest a little differently? We wanted to step into the shoes of something that's very relevant right now, which is we invest on more of the debt side because the banks have pulled back so much. So I think figuring out how one can invest to step into those shoes and say, hey, being more of a private lender, stepping into that side of the balance sheet, all of the capital stack, that type of investing has been very helpful. In addition to looking at stuff that's not directly real estate related, but adjacent, like investing in ATMs, things that are niche, non-real estate, but adjacent to real estate. So we look at that type of investing as well, and it's been very, very helpful and effective to build out as many income streams as possible around your income for your business and for your family, because real estate is volatile too. If everything across the market was perfectly fixed rate 30-year mortgages and it was a completely uninterrupted economic landscape, then it would be perfect cash flow all the time, which sounds great. That's not the reality. And the reality is diversification, even within real estate and beyond real estate into alternative stuff, has helped immensely. And you can just find that stuff out there. You have to know where to look, and you have to look hard. And that's why I love doing what I do.
Yeah. Well, let's look forward here. So let's say, you're working with someone, they're part of your investment club. By the way, guys, write this down. It's called Madison Investing Club, and there's also MadisonInvesting.com website. But I'll talk more about that in a minute. What I want to get to for the last big question, Spencer, is what about the exit plan? Some people call it the escape hatch. What happens when you're just ready to move on to the next phase of life, and what kind of thoughts do you have on that?
Yeah, I think in general, no one expects to have to exit when they do, and like we can all come up with a grand plan. And I'll give an example. We have a very common profile of member of our club right now, and these are entrepreneurs who have succeeded and they're building their own business. Right? They've whatever analogy you want to use. They've slayed the dragon. They built the empire, etc. Flew the rocket ship. And they built that, and then now they're looking at it 5 years out, 2 years out, maybe 10 years out, and they are trying to figure out. And these are folks across the country. One is snow plowing business, another one a contracting or a construction company, and they're trying to figure out. Well, they're going to have a windfall moment. Are they prepared for that structurally? Have they talked to have they done everything from structure an estate plan for their own personal stuff? Have they mapped out what they're going to do with the windfall money that comes after a sale event when they exit the business successfully? Of course, these are rosy scenarios of people who are exiting after a sale of some sort, right?
Yeah.
That's not always the case. I mean, there's the majority of the businesses that are out there are closer to more of like a lifestyle business or something that is generating income, but it's not going to be some massive windfall. And that's a beautiful thing too. People working in the business and on the business. And if that's the case, you just want to make sure you have that planned out with enough income streams before you actually pull the ripcord and decide to exit. And you want to have that with some buffer time. So those are the conversations that we do have on a regular basis. And I talk to folks and they say, well, gee, I hadn't thought about that, and because they think, oh, I'm going to leave the business and we've made some good investments, but we're going to get a nice check at the end. The riskiest moment for so many folks, unfortunately, Gary, I think is like they'll exit the business, their account's going to be full, but then now they're sitting there going to do, and they get antsy. They start thinking about what am I going to do with all these funds, and they go directly back into what they know how to do. And it's kind of like a handyman holding a hammer. They're going to go hit that nail because that's what they know how to do. And they're going to start a new business, and they're going to think it's going to go just as well. That's where the maximum risk occurs from what I've seen. Because they're like, oh, I still got it, but it's a different time. So thinking honestly and taking a really good look at what is the escape hatch? Are those income streams built ahead of time? Have they been talking to the right attorneys to support them, the right tax planning? All of those conversations are key. But most importantly, investing forward and having a plan for that windfall moment is key.
Yeah, I agree. One of my good friends is, well, I guess I can tell everybody he's retired now, but he was one of the managing directors for UBS Financial. And he now helps businesses prepare for what's probably one of the biggest decisions of their life. A lot of businesses are homegrown, sometimes they're multi-generational. And how do you prepare for that? How do you get the most out of that and manage the tax burden and so forth? So it's a big thing. But what's interesting is I want to go back to the beginning, where you get to the investing part, understand, you've been able to be involved in 2.3 billion in acquisitions for 20,000 units. And is that the investing club, the Madison Investing Club? Tell us about that. I know we're getting short on time here, but before we go, I want you to kind of talk about that. And what can people get on the website too, if you don't mind,
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, Madison Investing started very humbly. It's literally the name of the street where we purchased our first home. The first investments we made were pulled from home equity, and it grew from there. But now what we do is we are reached out to by many different active operators. These are big real estate folks in self-storage and multifamily. We built relationships with them over years. And I was overwhelmed utterly in the market when I had to go out and figure out who the heck am I going to trust with $100,000 in one check. And what we do now, it's built this whole business around this, is that ultimately folks trust us because we will go out and do the due diligence, get to know them, structure these offerings correctly, and make sure that we can invest alongside them with their own money. And so we'll share, about half a dozen deals per year that we believe in. And we're going to actually show that to our club members. They will have to come and get to know me a little bit. Our number one source of growth has been our happy other members that are referring a friend. And so that's how we've done that in a bit of an old school way is, I get to know each person that joins. Now we have hundreds of active investors that invest alongside us.
Nice. Okay. And then so if someone's listening and they go to MadisonInvesting.com, they'll get information on the club there, or they can make contact. Oh, that's awesome. So,
exactly. Yeah. Well, and they can sign up just to talk to me, and I'm happy to be a sounding board, even if they're still kind of figuring out which way is up on the journey.
Okay. Well, I appreciate everything you shared. I mean, there was a lot of detail here. You definitely brought the fire. We call it bringing the fire. You definitely brought the fire today. And I certainly appreciate that. And for everybody listening, if you wouldn't mind, please feel free to like and subscribe. But really, your reviews are like gold for us. I mean, your reviews make this whole thing go around. It's more important than you can imagine. So if you take a moment to do that, Spencer would appreciate it. I'd appreciate it. And we'll always look for you on the next podcast too. And Spencer, thank you again for sharing so much. Maybe one day we'll be able to cross paths. I do have family out where you are in the Bay Area, and I used to spend every other year out there for up to 5 months teaching and hiking and skiing, and you can do it all in beautiful California, man. So
that's right.
Beautiful place. But thanks for joining us, and everybody listening. God bless you and your families, and we will see you all on the next Massive Passive Cash Flow podcast.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Massive Passive Cash Flow. Be sure to go to realestatewithgarywilson.com to join our community and start building wealth today.